It was just after 4 in the morning when detectives paused the doorbell footage for the first time. The scene on the screen looked ordinary at a glance. A quiet hallway, dim lights, nothing unusual at first. But then a figure appeared. A man stepped out of an apartment, struggling to drag a large, heavy bundle wrapped in dark material. He pulled it across the floor with slow, deliberate effort, pausing once to adjust his grip before disappearing out of frame. Investigators watched in silence. They replayed it once, then again, then a third time. The timestamp was clear, the movement was clear, and the shape of the bundle was impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for them to realize that this single piece of footage would completely change the direction of the case. Just days earlier, a young mother named Sheylla Cabrera had been reported missing. At first, her absence looked like a simple disappearance. Maybe stress, maybe travel, maybe anything else. But this video forced everyone to confront a different possibility. A darker one that raised a single haunting question. How did a normal night in a family home turn into the beginning of a tragedy no one could have imagined? Before her name ever appeared in news reports, before investigators studied her final movements, Sheylla Cabrera was simply a young mother doing everything she could to create a better life. She was originally from Peru, where she grew up surrounded by family, familiar streets, and a culture she loved. Friends remembered her as warm, gentle, and patient, a person who always tried to stay positive even when life became difficult. She carried those qualities with her when she moved to the United States, determined to give her children opportunities she never had. Sheylla was a devoted mother of 3. Her days were filled with the ordinary routines of raising young kids, school drop-offs, meals, homework, and moments of keeping the household running as best she could. She didn't have mom, but she made the most of what she had. Her children were her world, and nearly every decision she made centered around their future. She dreamed of stability, safety, and a peaceful home where her kids could grow up with hope. Life in the U.S. wasn't easy. Being far from her own family meant she had to carry the weight of every challenge alone. Money was tight, work was demanding, and raising 3 children in a new country brought constant pressure. Yet she pushed through each day with determination. She believed that if she stayed strong and focused, her children would eventually have the life she imagined for them. This hope drove her forward, even when her personal life began to show signs of strain, signs she could no longer ignore. The Cabrera family lived in Lancaster, California, a quiet desert city where long, open streets stretch toward the mountains and life moves at a steady, unhurried pace. Their apartment complex was like many others in the area, simple, modest, and filled with families who were also trying to build stable lives. It was the kind of place where neighbors recognized each other in passing and children played in shared courtyards in the evenings. From the outside, nothing about the Cabrera's home suggested that anything unusual was happening inside. To most people, Sheylla and her husband looked like a young immigrant couple doing their best to settle into a new chapter of life. They had 3 young children, limited resources, and the pressure of navigating a foreign country without much support. It was a situation familiar to many immigrant families in the community. Long work hours, tight budgets, and the constant hope of making each year a little better than the last. From a distance, they seemed to be working together toward the same goals, managing the challenges of daily life and raising their children side by side. But beneath the surface, there were quiet signs that the family was under more strain than anyone realized. Small moments of tension had begun to appear behind closed doors, the kind of moments that are easy to miss from the outside, but impossible to forget when you live through them. At the time, those early warning signs didn't draw much attention. But later, as investigators pieced together the truth, those small cracks in the home's stability would take on a much deeper meaning. Behind the quiet walls of their Lancaster apartment, life for Sheylla was far more painful than most people knew. Her relationship with her husband, Josimar, had become a source of fear and constant tension. What began as a hopeful start between 2 young parents slowly turned into a pattern of control that tightened around her life more each year. Those close to her later shared that the emotional strain was obvious whenever she opened up about her struggles. She often tried to stay strong for her children, but the weight she carried was becoming harder to hide. Friends and family said that Josimar had a way of isolating her, slowly limiting parts of her life until she felt trapped. The way he spoke to her, the way he handled disagreements, and the way he monitored her movements left her feeling watched and controlled. Over time, the emotional pressure grew into something more dangerous. Sheylla had experienced moments of physical abuse in Peru, and those memories never fully left her. Though she tried to push forward in the United States, the old patterns returned, and this time there were fewer people nearby to help her. As the situation worsened, Sheylla began to confide in those she trusted most. She told her family that she felt unsafe and that she wanted to leave the relationship. She mentioned the fear she lived with, the threats, and the way her husband used the children to pressure her into staying. Leaving was not simple. She had 3 young kids, little support, and limited resources. But she had reached a point where remaining in the marriage no longer felt possible. By the time she expressed her desire to leave, the people closest to her sensed the urgency in her voice. What they didn't know then was just how little time she had left. Sheylla's last day alive began like any other, but the people who spoke to her later remembered a quiet determination in her voice. She had reached a point where she could no longer ignore the turmoil in her home. Throughout the day, she messaged and called family members in Peru, sharing her plans to finally end the relationship. She spoke with a clarity she hadn't shown before, saying she wanted to take steps to protect herself and give her children a safer future. Those conversations carried a mixture of fear and hope. Fear of what might happen if she confronted her husband, and hope that leaving would give her a chance to rebuild her life. Her family encouraged her to stay strong. They told her she deserved peace, that they would support her no matter what, and that she needed to take the first step toward freedom. But even with their words behind her, Sheylla felt uneasy. She hinted that her husband's behavior had been unpredictable recently, and she worried about how he might react if he discovered her intentions. She spoke softly about the situation, almost as if she feared being overheard. Her relatives sensed something heavier in her tone, a feeling that she was bracing herself for a difficult night. As the evening settled into the apartment, subtle signs suggested that something was wrong. The atmosphere inside the home felt tense. Voices were low, movements were cautious, and the usual noise of family life seemed strangely muted. Later, neighbors would mention hearing nothing unusual, but silence can often hide more than sound. Whatever happened inside those walls in the final hours of Sheylla's life, it was clear she felt vulnerable. She was preparing to make a decision that would change everything, unaware that the danger around her was already far closer than she realized. The events inside the apartment that night can only be reconstructed through evidence and the timeline investigators later uncovered. Although no one witnessed the exact moment it happened, the signs suggest that the confrontation between Sheylla and Josimar took place sometime in the early hours of the morning. What began as a tense private argument escalated into something far more violent. Investigators believe that during those hours, Josimar allegedly attacked and killed Sheylla inside their home while the children slept nearby. The details of the assault were never shared publicly in full, but what is known is that the violence was swift and left no chance for her to escape or defend herself. Once Sheylla was no longer able to move or speak, everything inside the apartment changed. The home that had once held a young mother and her 3 children became the scene of a devastating crime. Instead of calling for help or alerting anyone, Josimar shifted into a different kind of focus, one directed toward hiding what had happened. According to investigators, he wrapped Sheylla's body in a dark covering and prepared to remove her from the apartment. This decision marked the moment when the case moved from a domestic tragedy to a calculated attempt to erase the truth. What happened within those walls would remain hidden from the outside world until investigators began piecing together the signs. Neighbors heard nothing, and the children were too young to understand the danger unfolding around them. But the silence inside the apartment was the beginning of a sequence of actions that would eventually expose everything. From that moment forward, every step Josimar took would lead investigators closer to uncovering the truth about Sheylla's final hours. In the hours that followed, the first signs that something that was terribly wrong came from the people who knew Sheylla best. Her family in Peru tried calling her throughout the day, expecting to hear updates about her plans to leave the relationship. But every call went unanswered. Messages were left unread. Shimam, the sudden silence was alarming, especially because Sheylla was usually quick to respond, even during busy moments with her children. Friends nearby also noticed they hadn't seen or heard from her, and the absence felt unusual enough to raise concern. As the hours turned into a full day with no contact, worry grew into fear. Her relatives reached out to people in California, hoping someone could check on her. When no one could locate her, the uncertainty became overwhelming. Those closest to her knew something was wrong. Sheylla had been frightened the night before, and now she had vanished without explanation. Unable to ignore the possibility that she was in danger, her family contacted authorities and filed a missing person report. Police officers arrived at the apartment complex soon after. At first, they treated it like any other missing person case, checking the home, speaking with neighbors, and looking for any sign of where she might have gone. But nothing fit the pattern of someone who had simply left on their own. Her belongings were untouched, and there was no indication she had packed or made plans to travel. The lack of clues only deepened the sense of confusion. As officers expanded their search in the area, those who loved her were left waiting for answers, holding on to hope but unable to shake the growing fear that something far more serious had happened. Once the missing person report was filed, investigators began moving through the apartment complex, asking neighbors if they had seen anything unusual. Most people hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, but one neighbor mentioned owning a doorbell camera. Officers requested the footage, hoping it might show when Sheylla left or whether anyone had come to the apartment. What they found instead changed the entire direction of the case. The moment they saw a man dragging a large wrapped bundle out of the home at 4 in the morning, the search for a missing woman shifted into the investigation of a possible murder. From there, detectives turned their attention back to the apartment. A closer examination revealed signs of a struggle, details that may have gone unnoticed at first, but became clearer after the footage was reviewed. Small traces inside the home suggested that an attack had taken place. The more investigators looked, the more they found themselves facing the likelihood that Sheylla had never left the apartment alive. As they continued their search, they expanded their efforts beyond the neighborhood, trying to trace where the bundle from the video might have been taken. Their work eventually led them to a remote area in the Angeles National Forest. It was there, days after her disappearance, that they discovered a body wrapped in material similar to the one seen in the doorbell footage. This discovery confirmed what the family feared most. While investigators waited for the formal identification, the evidence around them painted a clear and devastating picture. The forested location, combined with the earlier surveillance, left little doubt about what had happened. During this time, another piece of the puzzle came to light. When officers attempted to locate Josimar for questioning, they learned he had already left the country. He had taken the couple's 3 young children and traveled back to Peru. His sudden departure raised even more suspicion and made it clear that this was no longer a search for a missing mother, but the pursuit of a man now believed to be responsible for her death. The investigation was no longer confined to California, it had become an international case. When investigators confirmed that Josimar had fled to Peru with the 3 children, the case quickly expanded beyond local authorities. Detectives contacted federal agencies, and an international alert was issued with the help of Interpol. Peruvian authorities were notified, and his name was added to their system as someone wanted for questioning in a homicide investigation. Over the next several days, officials tracked his movements and followed leads from people who had seen him after he returned to Lima. The pressure on him increased steadily as both countries worked together to bring him into custody. Faced with growing attention and the knowledge that he was now the primary suspect in a murder case, Josimar eventually surrendered to Peruvian authorities. His decision to turn himself in came after days of news coverage and public interest, as well as increasing contact from law enforcement. After the surrender, officials began the process of coordinating with the United States to arrange his extradition. This required cooperation between courts in both countries, along with formal paperwork outlining the charges and the evidence supporting them. The charges against him were serious. He faced allegations of murdering Sheylla, transporting her body, and fleeing the country to avoid prosecution. As the legal process moved forward, courts began reviewing the evidence gathered in California, including the doorbell footage and the discovery of the body in the Angeles National Forest. While awaiting extradition, he remained in custody as legal teams on both sides prepared for the next steps. Once returned to the U.S., he would face trial, where prosecutors planned to present their full case before a judge and jury. Meanwhile, authorities worked quickly to ensure the safety and well-being of the 3 children. Arrangements were made for them to be placed in the care of Sheylla's family. With the help of child welfare services and international coordination, the children were returned to the United States and reunited with relatives who could give them stability and support. Although nothing could undo what had happened to their mother, their return offered a small measure of relief in the middle of an unimaginable tragedy. News of Sheylla Cabrera's death left her family in Peru devastated. They had watched her build a life far from home with the hope that her children would have greater opportunities. Instead, they were met with the unbearable reality that she had suffered alone in her final moments. Her relatives spoke openly about the pain of losing her, a grief made even heavier by the distance that had separated them in her last years. In Lancaster, members of the community held small gatherings to honor her memory. People who barely knew her felt the weight of the tragedy, shaken by how quickly a quiet life had turned into a story no one could have imagined. For her children, the impact was even deeper. They had lived through events they were too young to understand, carried from one country to another in the aftermath of violence they could not fully process. Their world had changed rapidly, first losing their mother, then being taken across international borders, and finally being placed into the care of relatives who were determined to give them safety and love. The road ahead for them would be long, shaped by the trauma of what happened in the absence of the woman who had been the center of their lives. Sheylla's case became a powerful reminder of the hidden dangers within abusive relationships. The warning signs she spoke of, control, fear, isolation, are experiences many victims face long before violence becomes visible. Her story showed how difficult it can be for a person to leave, especially when children, finances, and immigration challenges are involved. It also highlighted the importance of paying attention to small changes, quiet pleas for help, and the patterns that appear long before tragedy strikes. Her life and loss sparked conversations about domestic violence services and the urgent need for stronger support systems for vulnerable families. In the end, the doorbell footage played a crucial role in uncovering the truth. Without it, investigators might have spent much longer searching for answers, and the events of that night could have remained hidden. The video captured a moment that exposed what had happened inside the home when no one else could see. It served as the final piece that connected the clues, guided the investigation, and allowed Sheylla's family to learn the truth. Though nothing can bring her back, the footage ensured her story was not buried in silence. It brought light to a darkness she never deserved and gave her loved ones a path toward justice.